I paid $5, then heard something hollow beneath the heaviest press.
She was 22 and homeless. No room, no family welcome, no key of her own, just a $5 bill and the last classified notice she had torn from a library board. And with that $5, she bought a condemned tin stamping shack leaning beyond Berlin in Hartford County, Connecticut, erased from county trade maps in 1968. The north wall bowed 6 inches outward. Rain entered through 3 seams in the roof. The county had closed it on October 14, 1997, with demolition planned for the coming spring. But beneath the iron base of a hand-cranked drop press lay a sealed cavity unopened for generations, holding money and tools meant for hands not yet born. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Chloe Mercer had been waiting her whole life without knowing it. She grew up in rooms where nothing stayed hers for long. Coats passed down twice before reaching her. Books vanished when cousins visited. At family dinners, she learned to sit near the kitchen door where leaving early looked like helping. By 12, she could fold herself into silence so neatly that adults praised her for being easy. Her mother, Elaine, had a careful voice and tired hands. She never struck Chloe, never shouted, never defended her either. She believed peace meant giving the loudest person whatever would quiet them, and Chloe was usually the cheaper sacrifice. Only great-grandfather Amos Mercer treated her as though attention were a form of inheritance. Every Saturday, he collected her in a blue Ford pickup and drove to his narrow workshop behind a clapboard house in New Britain. He had stamped tinplate before arthritis bent his fingers, and he still kept the old rituals: sweep the bench warm, the dies near the stove, wipe the press screw with whale oil substitute, test the sheet against the light. Chloe learned to listen for the clean metallic note that meant the tin was evenly supported. Amos let her turn the flywheel with both hands, guiding the last inch so the engraved die met the sheet without tearing it. At noon, they ate brown bread and sharp cheese from wax paper while rain ticked on the vent pipe. Exact work is kindness to whoever comes after. He meant that a hinge should close, a seam should hold, and a stranger should not have to repair what you were too hurried to finish. Amos died during Chloe's first year of community college. By the time she came home from the hospital, his workshop had been cleared. The die's pattern books, hand shears, and sample lanterns were gone. An uncle said the metal had been sold by weight. Her mother stood beside the empty bench and rubbed one thumb over the other, saying nothing. The cousins who managed the estate did not threaten. They arranged. Gregory wore polished brown shoes, even in the yard, and spoke in sentences that sounded settled before anyone answered. Marlene carried a leather folder and tapped each page twice before turning it. They moved accounts, appraisals, and signatures through quiet rooms, always asking Chloe to wait outside while adult matters were handled. When the will was read, they received houses, acreage, bonds, and controlling shares. Chloe received a tax liability parcel described as obsolete industrial outbuilding value $5. 3 weeks later, her landlord placed her chipped yellow mixing bowl on the curb before she returned from work. The lock had been changed. Her mother stood under the porch awning holding Chloe's canvas bag, the one Amos had once used for calipers and oilcloth. "You cannot keep making trouble for everyone here." 8 words. Elaine lowered the bag onto the wet step without meeting her daughter's eyes. Inside, someone drew the curtain. Chloe picked up the bowl, nested it over the bag's opening, and walked until the rain had soaked through both shoulders of her coat. For 6 weeks, she moved south and east by bus foot, and whatever warmth stayed open late. In Hartford, she slept 2 nights upright in the station, waking whenever the floor machine came near. In Middletown, she spent $11 on a hostel cot, then regretted it before dawn. New Britain gave her 3 nights in a church basement where the folding bed smelled of bleach and old wool. She washed in library restrooms and counted her money in bathroom stalls: $83, then $59, then $31. In Bristol, she slept behind a laundromat vent with her shoes tied through her belt loops. By the time she reached Berlin, she had $9.20, 1 clean blouse, and the yellow bowl wrapped in newspaper. The Berlin Peck Memorial Library was warm enough to make her hands ache as they thawed. She read every housing notice on the public board, though most required deposits larger than everything she owned. Beneath an ad for piano lessons hung a county disposal notice on pale green paper: abandoned industrial structure, $5 deed transfer, buyer accepts all risk. Someone had underlined demolition pending in red pencil. Chloe copied the parcel number onto the back of an overdue book slip. Then she took the $5 bill from her coat lining, smoothed Amos's old crease from its center, and walked toward the county clerk's office before the building could close. She did not yet know why the shack carried her family name. The bus left Chloe beside a closed gasoline station at 7:20 the next morning, 12 miles from the parcel and 3 miles from the center of Berlin. She walked east with the canvas bag across one shoulder and the yellow bowl tied inside it. The temperature reached 38 degrees by noon, but wind pushed beneath her coat whenever the road opened between fields. She covered 7 miles before darkness and slept in a hay barn with one broken hinge making a hollow between the bales and wrapping newspaper around her socks. At 2 in the morning, the temperature fell to 26. The cattle in the adjoining shed breathed steadily through the boards, and Chloe counted each breath until daylight. Berlin appeared gradually, rather than all at once. First came Wilcox Feed and Grain, with burlap sacks stacked behind cloudy windows. Then Rinaldi's Cafe, where a woman turned the sign from closed to open with one flowery hand. She passed Berlin Hardware Mercer's watch repair, though the surname made her stop in the narrow storefront of the New England Lamp Company. Across the road, a barber swept gray hair into a line outside the Blue Chair barber shop. The county clerk's office occupied the first floor of a brick municipal building whose brass doors had been polished around the handles and nowhere else. Chloe entered at 8:53, 7 minutes before opening, and stood beneath a clock that ran 4 minutes slow. The clerk arrived carrying a paper cup and a ring of keys. She was a narrow woman with silver hair cut evenly at her jaw and a small burn mark on the back of her right hand. Her nameplate read MRS Dorothy Vale, Senior Property Clerk. "You are here about the disposal parcel." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Vale unlocked the counter gate and removed the green notice from Chloe's hand as though it might stain something. "You understand there is no electrical service?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the well has not been certified?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the building carries an active condemnation order?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand that accepting the deed makes demolition, taxes, injury, and repair entirely your responsibility?" "Yes, ma'am." The clerk studied her coat, the damp hem of her trousers, and the canvas bag held close against her side. She did not ask where Chloe had slept. $5, she said. Chloe unfolded the bill Amos had creased years before. Mrs. Vale placed it flat beneath a glass paperweight, typed the parcel number into a beige terminal, and brought out a deed with 3 carbon copies. Chloe signed where the clerk marked in blue pencil. Mrs. Vale pressed a round brass stamp into a red pad and brought it down with both hands. The impression left the town seal beneath Chloe's name, slightly darker on one side. "You will take Worthington Ridge south," she said. "Turn onto Beckley Road after the old cemetery. Walk past the second stone wall and look for 2 black walnut trees. The lane is nearly gone. If you reach the Reservoir Road, you have passed it." She began fastening the copies together, then stopped. "Mercer." Chloe looked up. "Your full name is Chloe Anne Mercer?" "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Vale turned the deed toward herself and traced the former owner entry with one blunt fingernail. Her face changed only in the way a closed hand changes when it loosens. "Amos Mercer used to come here." Chloe's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "He recorded machinery liens for small shops," Mrs. Vale continued. "Tin workers, lamp makers, men who could not afford attorneys. He always brought the forms completed in black ink, never made me correct a date." "How was my great-grandfather?" The clerk sat back. Beyond the counter, the slow clock clicked once. "He asked about this parcel more than 30 years ago," she said. "Wanted to know whether the title had returned to the town. It had not then. There were unpaid claims and a missing heir. He came back every winter for 4 years." "Did he say why?" "No." Mrs. Vale slid the deed across the counter. "Only that some tools should not be sold by weight." She removed the $5 bill from beneath the paperweight, opened the shallow drawer beside her chair, and placed it inside rather than with the morning receipts. "The deed is valid," she said. "You should leave before the rain." Chloe stepped outside with 3 stamped copies folded into her bag. A cold mist had begun, fine enough to remain suspended around the courthouse lamps. She followed Worthington Ridge past old houses set close to the road, their stone foundations darkened by rain. At Beckley Road, she passed a man repairing a split-rail fence. He wore one red mitten and one brown glove. "You looking for the Mercer shop?" he called. "I think so." He pointed with the fence rail. "Lane after the walnuts. Dog will bark. She has no teeth." The dog belonged to a weathered woman standing beside a blue mailbox. It was a broad white animal named Poppy, and it barked from habit while leaning against Chloe's knee. The woman nodded toward 2 walnut trees whose limbs met above a sunken track. "Roof lost more tin in August," she said. "South side still holds." Chloe thanked her and entered the lane. Wet leaves concealed the wheel ruts. Sumac had grown through one stone boundary, and the ground sloped toward a narrow marsh shining between bare trees. At the end stood the shack. It was smaller than the picture in Chloe's mind and heavier in its presence. The structure measured perhaps 22 feet by 34, framed in chestnut and covered with weathered pine boards beneath remnants of stamped tin siding. The roof sagged over the rear corner. A brick chimney rose through one slope, missing its cap and several courses near the top. Above the double doors hung a sign so faded that only 3 words remained legible: Mercer Pressed Wares. The padlock had already rusted open. Chloe lifted it away and pulled one door until its lower edge scraped a half circle through the dirt. The smell reached her first: cold iron mouse nesting, damp ash, and the faint mineral sweetness of old tin. Light entered through roof seams in narrow white bars. Somewhere inside, water fell at patient intervals into metal. The front room held a scarred counter, 2 shelves, and a cast-iron stove with its pipe disconnected. Chloe touched the counter and felt grit roll beneath her fingertips. A cracked enamel cup stood upside down near the wall. When she lifted it, a spider crossed the pale circle it had protected from dust. The back room was the shop. 3 hand presses stood in a row, their flywheels taller than her shoulders. One had lost its handle, another leaned because the floor beneath its rear foot had sunk. The largest occupied the center of the room, bolted through wide oak planks to an iron base dark with old oil. Rust roughened its frame, but the screw thread still held a dull black sheen. Chloe placed both hands on the flywheel and moved it half an inch. The mechanism answered with a low, resistant groan that traveled through the boards into her shoes. Rain strengthened before dusk. She found a broom without half its bristles, cleared a space beside the stove, and laid flattened feed sacks beneath her coat. The roof leaked into 3 pans she discovered under the counter, each drop giving a different note. She ate the last heel of bread from her bag and drank from the bottle she had filled at the library. In darkness, the building settled around her. The chimney gave a small inward cough whenever the wind shifted. Mice worked behind the plaster. From the back room came an occasional sound of cooling metal, though there was no fire and had not been one for years. Chloe lay awake with Amos's canvas bag beneath her head. Through a break in the roof, she could see one clear star moving slowly beyond the branches. The shack had been waiting. By the 3rd morning, Chloe knew which floorboard complained beneath her left heel and which one answered only after rain. She found the well behind the walnut trees, hidden beneath a collapsed wooden cover and a mat of grapevine. The hand pump resisted through 14 strokes before brown water coughed from its spout. She filled 3 buckets, let the sediment settle, then boiled what she intended to drink. The outhouse stood 40 yards uphill, its door held shut by copper wire. She cleaned it with ash lime and water, carried one careful bucket at a time. Each night she learned another sound, the loose shutter striking twice in an east wind, the stovepipe ticking when the temperature fell, the long wooden sigh beneath the largest press. None of them frightened her once she could name their cause. On the 4th day she walked back to Berlin Hardware. The store smelled of cedar shavings, kerosene, and the iron dust that gathered beneath the key-cutting machine. Glass drawers lined the counter, each labeled in black pencil. Behind them stood Walter Pike, a square man with one white eyebrow and one dark one. He wore a carpenter's pencil behind each ear and rolled his shirt cuffs to precisely the same width. "You are the woman in the Mercer shop," he said. "I own it now." Walter looked toward her shoes where dried mud had cracked along the seams. "That is not the same as surviving it." "No, sir." She placed her list on the counter: chimney brush stove, cement, galvanized bucket, lamp oil, nails, soap, and something to patch the well cover. Walter read it without comment, then began setting items beside the register. "I have $4.20. You have credit." "I did not ask for credit." "No, Amos Mercer did, in a manner of speaking." Walter opened a ledger thick enough to stop a door. On a yellowed page near the middle, Amos Mercer appeared above a line of settled purchases, every balance marked paid. "I do not know when I can repay you. That makes 2 of us." He wrote Chloe Mercer beneath the old account and handed her a stained paperback titled "Repairs for the Practical Homeowner." "This one is free because no sensible person would pay for the advice," on page 87. The brush cost $6.40, the bucket $1.15, stove cement 89 cents, lamp oil 75 cents, and a pound of cut nails $1.60. Walter added a length of sash chain without entering a price. "For the well cover," he said, "bring the bucket back if the bottom leaks." The chimney took most of the next day. Chloe disconnected the stovepipe and stuffed damp rags around the thimble opening. From the roof, she lowered the round steel brush on a weighted rope, twisting it clockwise so the bristles would not unscrew from the fitting. The first pass stopped 6 feet down. She worked the rope in short strokes until a black crust broke loose and fell into the firebox with a sound like gravel poured onto a tray. Creosote came down in curled flakes, glossy and sharp-edged, mixed with 2 bird nests and the skeleton of a mouse. She brushed from the top for 3 hours, climbed down, cleared the stove, then repeated the process from below with shorter rods borrowed from Walter. By sunset, she had spent 7 hours on the chimney and filled half the galvanized bucket with soot. She sealed a split in the pipe collar with stove cement, waited until morning, then held a burning twist of newspaper beneath the flue. The smoke rose instead of folding back into the room. Her first fire was no larger than both her hands. She fed it dry walnut twigs, then one split piece of maple found beneath the counter. Heat moved slowly through the iron stove and touched the room in widening circles. Chloe boiled water, stirred oats with salt in the cracked enamel cup, and ate sitting on the floor. The meal had no butter, no milk, and no sweetness. It was hot. Afterward, she opened the shutters in the workroom and began an inventory. She chose only what could still answer a hand: 3 fly presses, a pair of bench shears with one repaired handle, a wooden mallet darkened where fingers had gripped it for decades, 2 soldering irons shaped like narrow hatchets, a stake anvil polished bright along one curved edge, a foot-powered beating machine with a leather belt gone stiff. 7 tin patterns hung from a nail, including the outline of a lantern chimney and a pierced pie-safe panel. Beneath the rear bench lay rolls of rusted sheet too damaged to save. On the wall, chalk marks showed measurements beside initials she did not recognize. Chloe copied them into the back of the repair manual. The largest press bothered her. Its iron base was broader than the others and bolted through 4 oak planks, yet the floor around it had not sunk evenly. When she tapped the boards with the mallet, the north side gave a dense wooden knock. The south side answered with a thinner note. She tapped again. Solid, solid, hollow. Chloe knelt and swept grit from the seams. One plank beside the rear bolt was shorter than it should have been, its end concealed beneath the base flange. She pressed her shoulder against the flywheel. The machine did not move. The next morning, Walter lent her a bottle jack and 2 oak cribbing blocks. "Do not trust the jack alone," he said. "I will not." She loosened the rear bolts with lamp oil and a wrench extended by a length of pipe. Each nut turned less than a quarter rotation before stopping. It took 2 hours to free them. She raised the press 1 inch, set the oak blocks beneath the frame, and lowered its weight onto them. Under the base lay a circular cedar disc fitted flush into the floor. It was 20 inches across, gray with dust but unrotted. 2 shallow finger holds had been carved near one edge. Chloe inserted the tips of the bench shears and lifted. Cold air rose from below. The compartment was lined in lead sheet and deep enough to hold 4 parcels wrapped in oilcloth. No hinges, no decorative box, only a cavity built between floor joists and protected by the weight of the press. Amos had once taught her that hiding something well meant making its concealment part of the building's daily work. Chloe removed the smallest parcel first. Inside lay 3 fine chasing tools, a set of dividers, and a burnisher made from polished agate. Their handles were wrapped in waxed linen. Each had been cleaned before storage. The second parcel held thin sheets of unused tinplate separated by brown paper, their surfaces still pale beneath a film of oil. The third was heavier. Chloe unfolded the cloth 1 layer at a time and found 12 engraved steel master dies, each nested in a fitted wooden tray. One carried a pattern of wheat and small stars. Another showed a federal eagle surrounded by punched rays. The deepest die bore a repeating pomegranate design so exact that the seeds remained distinct beneath her thumb. She did not touch the cutting faces with bare skin. Amos had taught her that much. The last parcel contained a tin document box sealed around its lid with black wax. Chloe warmed the blade of a putty knife near the stove and eased the wax free without bending the rim. Money filled the lower half. There were paper notes bound in linen tape and cloth bags marked by year. She carried everything to the front room, closed the shutters, and counted at the scarred counter where daylight fell most evenly. The bills came first. 10s, 20s, 50s, and a small bundle of $100 notes, all older issues but carefully flattened. The coin bags held Morgan silver dollars, Walking Liberty, $50, Indian head cents, and $20 St. Gaudens gold pieces wrapped separately in tissue. Beneath them lay a purple heart in its worn case, the reverse engraved with Elijah Mercer, 1918. Chloe counted once, recorded each amount, then counted again from the opposite direction. The total was $45,000 exactly. Not $44,999, not $45,001. The roundness felt less like accident than instruction. Someone had measured what should remain and stopped. A folded letter rested beneath the metal. The paper had browned along its edges, and her name was not written on the outside. Only one line appeared across the front in handwriting she knew before she admitted knowing it. "For the Mercer who finds the press still standing." Chloe placed the letter beside the lamp but did not open it. She returned the coins to their bags, covered the dies with their oilcloth, and carried the purple heart outside in its case. Evening had cleared the rain from the air. Beyond the walnut trees, the marsh held a long strip of reflected sky, disturbed only where water moved around reeds. She sat on the well cover until darkness erased the road. The letter remained inside, waiting beneath the lamp. The shack had been waiting. Morning entered through the roof seams before Chloe rose. Frost had silvered the inside edges of the windows, and the stove held only a shallow bed of ash. She warmed her hands around the enamel cup, then carried the unopened letter to the counter. The slant of the capital M, the narrow loop in the R, and the hard downward stroke of every T belonged to Amos. She broke the seal with the tip of the agate burnisher. "My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this, the press is still standing, and you have already done more than many people promised they would do. My name is Amos Jonathan Mercer. In March of 1984, Dr. Helen Farrow at Hartford Hospital told me I had pulmonary fibrosis. She gave the illness a careful name and gave me with equal care no promise that I would live long enough to finish what I had begun. I did live longer, not long enough. Our trade began with Nathaniel Mercer, who came to Berlin in 1826 and learned tinplate work under Silas North. His daughter Ruth Mercer Hale cut lantern patterns here from 1858 until 1891. Ruth's son Jacob Hale Mercer rebuilt the rear press after the flood of 1901 and taught his daughter Miriam to engrave master dies. Miriam married Thomas Mercer in 1904, and their son Elijah carried her small chasing hammer to France in 1917. He did not carry it home. I was born to Elijah's younger brother Samuel in New Britain in 1922, and I learned at this bench before I was tall enough to reach the flywheel. The trade closed on November 3, 1952. After that date, the presses were silent for more than 30 years. Buyers came for the iron. Collectors came for the signs. Men who had never made a seam offered to purchase the dyes as decoration. I refused them all, though I could not secure the title to the building before my health failed. The metal belongs to Elijah. He died near the Meuse Argonne in 1918. It should not be sold. It should be carried once to a place where his name can be spoken, then kept with the tools. The money is not a reward. It is time. Use it to make the roof hold the chimney draw and the floor bear weight. A craft cannot return in a room that is killing the craftsperson. When you begin the tin, warm the steel dies to about 110 degrees Fahrenheit before the first strike. Cold steel draws moisture and marks the plate. For soft solder use, 1 part sal ammoniac to 4 parts clean water on the copper bit and keep the iron hot enough to flow without scorching the flux. Anneal stubborn sheet only to a dull blue-gray and let it cool in still air. On the fly press, bring the die down slowly for the first impression. Hold 2 seconds, then turn the wheel through the finishing stroke. Never force a crooked blank. Remove it and begin again. There are original dies beneath the press because patterns belong where they were proved. The pomegranate came from Miriam's hand. The wheat border was Ruth's. The eagle was cut after Elijah enlisted. Their value is not what someone will pay. Their value is that another pair of hands may learn where the pressure belongs. Inheritance is not possession. It is the work left unfinished, placed carefully where a stranger in the family might one day be able to continue it. Keep what helps the work. Spend what protects it. Pass on what you cannot complete. I do not know your name, your age, or whether anyone has told you that you belong here. People often mistake ownership for welcome. They are not the same. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Amos Jonathan Mercer, September 20, 1987. Chloe read the letter twice. The second reading took longer because she stopped wherever the pen had pressed deeply enough to leave a ridge in the paper. When she finished, she folded it along the original creases, matching each weakened line precisely, and rested both palms on the closed page. Behind the shop, the ground sloped toward the marsh. Amos had written a smaller note in the bottom margin. Miriam marked the first good water with 3 cuts in stone. Chloe went through the back door carrying the letter inside her coat. She followed the well runoff past a tangle of winterberry and found a low granite marker almost covered by moss. 3 parallel cuts crossed its upper face. Beneath them, worn nearly smooth, was a pomegranate no larger than a thumbprint. She cleared the moss with a twig rather than her knife. That evening, she cleaned one of the old pierced lanterns found beneath the rear bench. Its door hung crooked and the mica panels had gone cloudy, but the wick mechanism still turned. Chloe trimmed a new cotton wick, filled the reservoir with a little lamp oil, and struck a match. Light passed through the punched wheat pattern and scattered small grains across the wall. The building had not saved her alone. Mrs. Vale had placed the $5 bill in her own drawer and spoken Amos's name when silence would have been easier. Walter Pike had opened an account without asking for proof that she deserved it. Doris Rinaldi had wrapped 2 biscuits in paper when Chloe paused outside the cafe window, then pretended they were yesterday's leftovers. June Bell, the woman with the toothless dog, had left a covered jar of well water beside the lane before the pump was cleared. None of them had changed the whole direction of her life in a single gesture. They had given her 1 dry night, 1 useful tool, 1 warm meal, 1 less burden to carry to morning. Sometimes that was the distance between stopping and continuing. Before we move on, think of 1 small kindness someone once gave you when they may not have known how badly you needed it. Tell us in the comments what they did and if you can say their name. Quiet kindness deserves to be remembered. Chloe returned the letter to its tin box, but kept the lantern burning beside her bedroll. She laid the chasing tools and Amos's dividers on the floor within reach, their handles aligned on a folded cloth. For the first time, she slept beside objects no one could quietly take away. The first snow came on December soon, 4 inches laid evenly across the lane and the surviving roof tin. Chloe stood beneath the worst leak with the repair manual open against the counter and read the roofing chapter 3 times. On the 4th reading, the measurements stopped looking like warnings. The main roof was 22 by 36 feet when the overhangs were included. Allowing 10% for breakage, she calculated 900 cedar shingles, 2 rolls of 30-pound felt, and 14 pounds of hot-dipped nails. Walter checked the figures, crossed out 1 number, then put it back. You counted the starter course. Yes, most people forget. From beneath his counter, he brought out a roofing hatchet with a narrow blade, a square pole, and a handle darkened almost black by use. My brother Owens, he said. He has no need of it now. Chloe accepted it with both hands. The man who arrived the following morning was Leon Barstow, 71, a former roofer whose left ear folded inward from an old frostbite injury. He climbed the ladder, pressed 1 boot against the sagging line, and came down without hurry. I cannot pay you, Chloe said. Good, Leon answered. Then we will not argue over price. They worked for 11 days. Leon showed her how to sister a split rafter with a straight length of spruce, clamping it tight before driving bolts through both pieces. They snapped a chalk line across each course and worked from the eaves upward, keeping every joint clear of the 2 below it. He taught her to start each nail with 1 stroke, seat it with the second, and finish it flush with the third. That nail's proud. Chloe looked along the shingle. Pull it. By the 6th day, her shoulders burned before noon. By the 9th, she could judge exposure without reaching for the gauge. Leon never praised the work, but he stopped checking every course. They finished on December 14th. Snow began again as Chloe drove the last ridge nail. Inside, she waited beneath the old leak with her palm open. The roof gave her only silence. January exposed what the first fire had hidden. 3 bricks above the roofline were spalling their faces, flaking away in thin red shells. Inside the shop, mortar powdered beneath Chloe's thumb and fell onto the stove like pale flour. Leon would not climb in the cold, but he stood below and called measurements while Chloe dismantled the damaged courses. Walter supplied hydraulic lime and fire clay, warning her not to substitute Portland cement against old brick. She mixed 3 parts washed sand to 1 part hydraulic lime for the exterior joints, then added fire clay in equal measure to lime around the flue tile where heat would strike hardest. For 3 weeks, temperatures remained in the 20s. Chloe warmed bricks beside the stove, carried them up wrapped in sacking, and laid only what she could protect before dusk. Her bare hands went numb every 15 minutes. Gloves caught mortar and ruined the joint edges, so she worked until her fingers stiffened, climbed down, held them around the enamel cup, and returned when feeling came back as needles. One morning, a newly laid joint cracked because she had mixed it too dry. She cut it out before breakfast and began again. The final cap went on beneath a sky the color of unpolished steel. Chloe covered the work with canvas for 4 days, misting the mortar so it would cure slowly rather than freeze. On January 29, she lit a test fire with newspaper cedar splints and 1 piece of seasoned maple. The smoke rose in a narrow column, passed through the rebuilt throat, and drew cleanly above the roof without spilling once into the room. Chloe stood outside until the smoke disappeared into the low clouds. The floorboards were white pine, though years of oil soot and iron filings had made them nearly black. Hand-cut rose-head nails held the planks to joists that remained sound except beside the rear press. Chloe reset each loose nail with a narrow punch and replaced only those bent beyond use. Walter rented her a random orbit sander for $14 per day. "Return it before closing," he said. "Tomorrow counts twice." She began with 80 grit discs, moving with the grain and never allowing the machine to pause in one place. The first pass lifted dirt and brown clouds and revealed pale streaks beneath. She vacuumed the joints with a borrowed shop machine, then worked the floor again at 120 grit. The final pass at 220 removed the last swirl marks near the windows and softened the edges where generations of boots had worn shallow paths. She applied 3 coats of boiled linseed oil, each one spread thin with a folded cotton cloth, and rubbed until no wet patches remained. The finish required a 48-hour cure before furniture or machinery could be lowered back into place. As the oil settled, the boards changed from dark honey toward mahogany. Old nail heads appeared like small black seeds along each plank. One morning, Chloe woke unable to lift the sander from the corner where she had left it. Nothing was injured. The work simply seemed farther away than the length of the room. She carried her coat to the marsh and sat on a fallen walnut limb. A great blue heron stood in the shallows, motionless except for its throat. For nearly an hour it watched the water, then struck once and lifted a silver fish. Chloe did no work that day. The following morning she sanded the last strip beneath the counter. There were 8 windows in the shack. 3 had no glass at all. 4 were cracked from corner to corner. The 8th held one original pane made in 1788, its surface wavering with tiny seeds and drawn lines. Chloe removed that sash first, wrapped it in a blanket, and stored it flat beneath the counter until the others were finished. She scraped each rabbet clean without cutting into the wood, brushed on linseed oil, and set the new glass against thin bedding putty. Walter gave her a half-used tub of DAP 33 and showed her how to roll the compound into a rope, press it beneath the pane, then draw the putty knife in one continuous stroke so the bevel sealed against the glass. "Lift the corner," he said. "Do not dig." The sash cords had rotted inside the weight pockets. Chloe replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton cord, feeding each length over the pulley and tying a figure-8 knot through the counterweight eye. The first sash dropped crooked. She opened the pocket again, shortened one cord by 1/2 inch, and tested it until the window stayed wherever her hand released it. February wind found every unfinished opening. She worked with a scarf tied over her ears and warmed the putty near the stove when it grew too stiff to tool. The preserved pane went into the eastern wall. Chloe seated it without forcing the old glass square, allowing the sash to remain slightly imperfect around it. When morning light passed through, the walnut trees appeared to bend gently in the wavering surface. On the final window, she drove the last glazing point and looked up. A chickadee had landed on the walnut branch outside, close enough that she could see its feet gripping the wet bark. It tilted its black-capped head toward the new pane, tapped once with its beak, and flew toward the marsh. Chloe smoothed the final line of putty and left the window open 1 careful inch. The walls revealed that her weakness after the windows stopped moving in the wind. Horsehair plaster had separated from hand-split oak lath beside the chimney, and 3 patches Chloe attempted there fell before they dried. The first cracked around its edge, the second sagged, the third struck the floor at midnight and broke across her boots. Walter brought an old flour sack from his storeroom. Inside was horsehair saved by his father for plaster repairs, washed, combed, and tied in loose bundles. Chloe soaked the lath, then pressed a scored scratch coat through the gaps until it formed keys behind the wood. For the brown coat, she mixed lime plaster with sand and short lengths of hair, spreading it 3/8 of an inch thick and leaving it to cure for 72 hours beneath damp cloth. The finished coat went on 1/8 of an inch, worked with a steel trowel until the wall held a soft, uneven light. She touched the repaired edge near the chimney. These patches will hold another 100 years. Doris Rinaldi began leaving paper bags on the doorstep every Thursday. She was a broad woman with flour permanently caught in the creases of her knuckles, and the bags contained heel slices, 2 eggs or soup sealed in a jar beneath wax paper. Chloe carried money to the cafe after the third delivery. Doris pushed it back with one finger. "Pay me in candles when the shop reopens." She did not ask whether Chloe intended to reopen it. Caleb Pike arrived one Saturday on a blue Schwinn bicycle, a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 16, long-wristed, and still wore the uneven haircut his mother had given him around the ears. Without introducing himself, he split the walnut rounds stacked near the lane and built a dry pile beneath the rear eave. When Chloe offered him $1, he shook his head. "My mother said, about your grandfather." He left before she could ask what his mother had said. Reverend Boyd passed each morning on his walk to the church. He had a white mustache trimmed straight across his lip and carried an umbrella whether the sky was clear or not. At the lane, he tipped his hat, placed 2 fingers briefly against the old sign, and spoke the same 4 words. "Keep her roof above." Then he continued toward town. Chloe postponed the cellar until February 11th because each time she opened the door beneath the back stairs, cold air carrying the smell of earth moved through the shop. 7 granite steps descended into a room 12 feet by 15, its floor laid in fieldstone and pitched toward a narrow drain. The walls were dry. At the center stood a dressed granite slab wider than a grave marker and carved with the same pomegranate mark cut into Miriam's master die. Chloe cleared the dust from its edges but did not lift it. Under the third stair, her broom struck wood. She reached into the gap and drew out a small oak box darkened by damp but tightly joined. It held a brass key whose bow had been shaped into a pomegranate with 7 pierced seeds. Beneath the key lay a tintype dated 1903. A young woman stood outside the shack before the roof had sagged. She held a chasing hammer against one shoulder and wore a work apron over a pale dress. Her jaw, the set of her eyes, and the slight unevenness of her mouth were Chloe's own features carried through time. On the back in faded ink someone had written, "Miriam Mercer, daughter of Jacob, age 25, summer of 1903. Chloe placed the photograph beside Amos's letter and hung the key on a small nail above the mantel. She tried it in the desk, the document box, the surviving cupboards, and every lock she could find. It opened nothing. She left it where morning light could touch the brass. Snow retreated from the lane in gray ridges. The creek beyond the marsh grew loud with meltwater, and the walnut branches produced green catkins that swung above the restored windows. Chloe cleaned one small die, warmed it beside the stove, and laid a square of tin plate beneath it. Then she stopped. The roof was sound, the chimney drew, and the workroom could bear the presses again, but she would not begin the full craft that spring. The old patterns deserved more than hunger, urgency, or gratitude disguised as skill. She selected one worn silver coin from the cache to exchange for practice material. On small samples, she would learn the pressure of each press, the heat of each soldering iron, and the point where metal ceased resisting and began to receive. The house was patient, so was she. 2 winters later, on December 8, 2024, Chloe finished the first object she was willing to sign. It was a small pierced lantern made from hand-cut tin plate 12 inches tall with Ruth Mercer's wheat border stamped along the roof and Miriam's pomegranate pattern worked into each side panel. Chloe had ruined 9 panels before learning how little pressure the old die required after warming. She soldered the final seam in 3 passes, cleaned the flux with hot water, and rubbed the surface with chalk and oil until it held a quiet gray shine. At dusk, she set a candle inside. Wheat and pomegranates appeared on the walls, separate patterns joined by light. The interior no longer resembled the condemned room Chloe had entered. White pine floors reflected the stove's glow. The presses stood level on rebuilt foundations. Finished plaster followed the uneven shape of the old framing rather than hiding it. Amos's letter rested beneath glass above the workbench, and the original window bent the eastern morning into slow waves. Only the cellar slab remained untouched. The brass key found its lock during the pruning of the older walnut tree. A storm had torn away one low branch, exposing a square iron plate set into the trunk where bark had grown around its edges. Chloe cleaned the plate with a stiff brush and found a keyhole beneath a hinged cover stamped with 7 small seeds. The pomegranate key turned once. Inside the hollow was a copper cylinder wrapped in tarred cloth. It contained a folded 48-star American flag no larger than a handkerchief and a note written by Miriam in October 1918 while influenza and war reports moved through Connecticut together. "My son Elijah is in France, and the newspapers give us numbers when what mothers require are names. I have placed this flag in the tree he climbed as a boy. If he returns, he may laugh at me and take it down himself. If he does not, let it remain until someone has enough patience to look where living wood has kept it." The final line had been added later in darker ink. I did not return. Chloe folded the note along its existing creases and carried the flag inside without opening it further. For several days it rested beside the Purple Heart. Then she called the Connecticut State Veteran Cemetery in Middletown and asked whether Elijah Mercer's name appeared in its records. It did not. On November 11, 2025, she carried the medal to Maple Cemetery in Berlin, where a family stone listed Elijah beneath the names of his parents. Walter stood at a distance with his hat in both hands. Chloe read Miriam's note aloud, placed the closed metal case against the stone, and remained until the noon bells ended. She took the medal home before rain reached the cemetery. The cash stayed largely intact. Chloe used one gold coin to stabilize the foundation beneath the center press, $2 silver to purchase tinplate and soldering copper, and an Indian head cent to buy the first sheet on which she practiced Miriam's design. The rest she wrapped again in oilcloth, returned to the tin box, and placed beneath the cedar disc. Above it, she added a note of her own. For the next one, use only what protects the work. She lowered the press onto its iron base and tightened each bolt in sequence until the machine stood as it had before she was born. The shop reopened without a newspaper notice or painted announcement. Doris pinned one index card to the cafe corkboard. Mercer pressed wares, lanterns, panels, small repairs, orders taken Saturdays. The first request came from a woman who wanted a replacement panel for her grandmother's pie safe. The second was for a chimney cap. By spring, Chloe kept a mailing list of 43 names in a ledger beside the door. She accepted only work she could finish carefully and returned deposits when a pattern did not belong to her tools. No tour buses came. No collectors gathered outside. On most afternoons, the loudest sound remained the slow rotation of the flywheel. Caleb returned in June carrying a pine board wrapped in an old bedsheet. He had grown broad through the shoulders and wore a carpenter's apron with each pocket full of shavings. "I made something," he said. The board was hand-carved with the words Mercer Pressed Wares. Beneath them, in smaller letters, he had added, "and daughters." Chloe ran one finger along the new words. "There are no daughters." "Not yet," Caleb said. "That is not the same as never." He meant students, though neither of them said so. By autumn, 2 women from New Britain came on Saturday mornings to learn how to cut blanks without curling the edges. A retired machinist joined them in December and spent 3 weeks repairing the loose bearing on the smallest press. Chloe charged no tuition. Each student contributed hours to the roof, the woodpile, or the cleaning of tools. Caleb hung the sign beneath the old one. For several months, both remained the faded name above and the unfinished future below. On the 3rd anniversary of her arrival, Chloe took a clean sheet of paper from Amos's tin box. She warmed the shop, sharpened a pencil, and began a letter. "My dear one, whoever you are." She wrote that the building had nearly been demolished and that a clerk had kept $5 apart from the town's receipts. She recorded the roof measurements, the lime ratios, and which floorboards still creaked after rain. She explained that the pomegranate dye required less pressure than pride would suggest, and that the wheat border tore if the blank was hurried. She did not tell the next person what life should mean. She told them how to clean a soldering copper where water entered during a northeast storm and why the old pane must never be forced square. Near the end, she wrote one sentence by itself. The shack had been waiting. Chloe signed the page but left the date blank. The letter was not finished because the work was not finished. She folded it once and placed it inside the document box beside Amos's original. Outside evening settled over the marsh. A lamp glowed behind the preserved eastern pane, making the old glass appear almost liquid. Chloe closed the doors, tested the latch, and listened as the presses cooled in the dark. The tin stamping shack waits. It has always waited. In the county clerk's office, Dorothy Vale retired with little ceremony. Her replacement emptied the shallow desk drawer before moving in and found an old $5 bill beneath a stack of carbon forms. A crease crossed its center, pressed there by hands that had once carried tools. Mrs. Vale asked to keep it. She placed the bill back in the drawer and told the new clerk that some payments were not meant to be deposited. The tin stamping shack waits. It has always waited.